Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an important hearing, and thank you for convening it. It's also timely. I also want to thank all of our witnesses. Your research and your advocacy have done a lot to inform us and the world about what's happening, the atrocities being committed in the Xinjiang region by the Chinese Communist Party. You know, through the decades, the crimes of the Chinese Communist Party have been as consistent as they have been egregious. Yet somehow these tyrants maintain the ability to shock the world even further with their cruelty and their callousness. The Xinjiang Uyghurs Autonomous Region in the last 2 years has experienced the classic forms of communist totalitarianism combined with the application now of new and advanced technologies. The difference between the Chinese Communist Party's crimes of the past and those of the present is the motivation. The past was about power alone. The present is now about both power but also about profit. Chairman Xi Jinping and his henchman, Chen Chuan-Gua, who, by the way, used to oversee Chinese brutality and repression inside of Tibet, so he's a specialist at this, revived collectivization to force Uyghurs into the harness of the Chinese party state. Just as collectivization created famines that harmed millions in China, this new effort is blazing a trail of human suffering. The problem goes much deeper than simply 1 million or more Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities detained in what can only be called concentration camps and who are forced to labor there. For those able to escape the camps, they face the full power of the Chinese party state mobilized against them and their families inside and outside of China. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Uyghur men and women have been forced through a regimen of military discipline and political re-education in preparation to take jobs in satellite factories. The Chinese Communist government offers incentives for Chinese companies to exploit this labor as the cost of doing business in coastal provinces rises. And what of the families and the children and the elderly? They're removed from their families' care so the adults can work in the factories. Instead of the warm embrace of their families, the young and the elderly are forced into the stifling custody of the Chinese Communist Party. For the children, this means the loss of their language, their culture, their faith, their heritage. For the elderly, this means loneliness and isolation in their final years. Their children and grandchildren will never hear the stories of lives well lived, of hardships conquered, or the importance of faith and values in a brutal, communist-governed world. Today's hearing, however, is not about this alone. It is about understanding how the party integrates labor and social control and the national security and moral risks for individuals and companies that deal with China. The network of detention facilities and factories has turned Xinjiang into a forced labor camp roughly the size of the states of California, Montana, Texas, and Florida combined. Millions of Uyghurs and other predominantly Muslim ethnic minorities labor in textile and light manufacturing and are prohibited from practicing their faith. Simply put, this is slavery, the slavery of socialism, with Chinese characteristics. Earlier this month, the Trump administration announced sanctions, as the chairman said, targeting Chinese officials as well as governmental and commercial entities for these severe human rights abuses, and I believe these also constitute crimes against humanity. We all welcome these steps. We also believe more can and should be done to resolve one of the world's greatest ongoing tragedies and to hold accountable its perpetrators. I hope the House will soon pass Senate Bill 178, the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, that the Senate passed last month. The bill would require the administration to gather information about the situation in Xinjiang and China's efforts to suppress international awareness of it. China's efforts to silence Uyghurs and turn the world's attention away from the ongoing atrocities in Xinjiang have included the coercion and the intimidation of American citizens and residents here and abroad. This is an outrage that must be addressed. The U.S. government needs to do its part to ensure Americans and the world are aware of what the Chinese government is doing in Xinjiang and have the freedom to express it. Despite the efforts of our witnesses today, Americans and American companies in particular are all too unaware of what is taking place. For example, the National Basketball Association maintains a residential training camp in Xinjiang, which seemingly oblivious to the contradiction between speaking out about societal issues here at home, which they have the full freedom to do, but yet staying silent about China's oppression. Only after the U.S. Commerce Department added the Chinese artificial intelligence company SenseTime to the entity list last week for its role in facilitating all these crimes did MIT begin to review its relationship with the firm. So it's long overdue for Americans and important institutions and academia and the private sector to wake up and to fully realize the real risks of doing business with China. So I thank all of you again for being here today. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the discussion.